The wind had a way of talking out on the high desert, whispering across the sagebrush like it knew every secret a man tried to bury. For 23 years, Buck Halden had listened to that wind every dawn and every dusk while graying fences, mending roofs, and drinking coffee thick enough to stain a man's soul. He'd been a cowboy his whole life, and retirement hadn't softened him. The ranch sat 50 miles from the nearest town, and Buck preferred it that way. Solitude fit him like an old boot, cracked, quiet, dependable. He talked mostly to his horses and sometimes to the radio if the news anchor said something foolish. Folks around Clayton County still told stories about him, mostly half-true tales from when he rode broncs, chased rustlers, and punched a man who tried to steal his saddle. But Buck himself was plain, deliberate, stubborn, and peacefully lonely. One late afternoon, as the sky burned rust-red and the cicadas buzzed their heat songs, Buck noticed 5 figures walking the long dirt road toward his property. At first he thought they were hikers who'd lost their way. People got turned around out here all the time. But as they came closer, he saw they were all women, dressed in traditional Apache skirts and shawls, carrying bundles tied with faded cloth. 5 widows, he realized. He knew because he had met 2 of them before, years back at a tribal gathering he'd been invited to by a friend. They were older now, faces shaped by sun and grief, but their eyes were steady. He stepped off the porch, wiping his hands on a rag tucked in his belt. They stopped a few yards from him. The oldest, Clara Nantan, stepped forward. "Buck Halden," she said, her voice rough but warm. "We come asking for help." Buck nodded once. "What's happened?" Clara looked back at the others, then met his gaze. "Our homes are gone. Fire took them. We have nowhere to stay. We were told you have space, and you are a man who keeps his word." Buck blinked. His ranch was big, sure, but he'd never had 5 extra people here at once, much less 5 grieving women needing shelter. He opened and closed his mouth like an old barn door before finally muttering, "Well, suppose I do have the room." The youngest widow, Olita, lifted her bundle higher on her shoulder. "Everything we have left is what we carry." Buck felt something slip inside his chest, a small, unexpected ache. He'd lived alone so long that the idea of company, especially company in need, felt like a gust of warm wind against old wood. "Come on then," he said, jerking his head toward the house. "Ain't fancy, but it's dry and there's stew on the stove." The women exchanged relieved glances. As Buck led them inside, he felt the ranch shift around him, as if the place itself was waking up after years of quiet. That night, the once silent house hummed with soft voices, the sound of pots clinking, and the shy laughter of women who were trying to remember what it felt like to be safe. Buck lay awake longer than usual, staring at the ceiling. The desert wind rattled the windows. For the first time in years, he did not feel alone. Scene 2 began with the smell of fry bread. Buck woke before dawn, as he always did, but instead of the usual cold kitchen and bitter quiet, he found Clara rolling dough with determined hands while Alita tended a pan of sizzling oil. 2 of the other widows, Maria and Della, were sweeping the floor and rearranging shelves that hadn't been touched since Buck's wife passed 40 years earlier. The 5th widow, Irene, was watching a pot of beans warming on the stove. Buck stood there blinking, feeling like he'd walked into a stranger's house by mistake. "Morning, Buck," Clara said without looking up. "You don't have to do all that," he said, rubbing his eyes. "This place has been fine." "This place," Maria replied, "was growing cobwebs big enough to catch a deer." Clara chuckled. Buck snorted. "It had personality." "It had dust," Della corrected, pointing her broom at him. He tried to protest again, but a warm plate was set in front of him before he could finish. Fry bread, beans, and coffee that tasted better than anything he'd made in 20 years. As he ate, the widows moved around the kitchen with ease, talking softly in a mix of English and Apache. He caught pieces of conversation, memories of husbands gone, the fire that burned their village edge, the struggle of rebuilding. He didn't interrupt. He didn't know how. The day unfolded in ways Buck didn't expect. Instead of doing his chores alone, he found Alita helping him feed the horses, asking questions about each one like they were old friends. Maria and Della took to the garden, pruning and clearing weeds with efficient hands. Irene started reorganizing the pantry, muttering about expired cans Buck didn't even know he owned. Clara followed him out to the field where he was repairing fence posts. She stood beside him, holding nails and tools, working in companionable silence. When he'd finished tightening a wire, she said, "You think we're a burden." Buck wiped his brow. "Did I say that?" "You didn't have to." He sighed. "I just ain't used to all this." Clara nodded. "We're not here to take your life apart, Buck. Just to rest long enough to build ours again." He studied her lined face, her steady posture, the strength that grief hadn't managed to shake. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need," he said quietly. Clara placed a hand on his arm. "We know. That's why we came." Days turned into weeks. The widows settled into the rhythm of ranch life as if they'd been born to it. Buck found himself talking more than he had in years, telling stories of his rodeo days, listening to theirs about husbands who'd hunted, farmed, danced, prayed, and passed on. At night the house glowed with lamplight and voices, weaving warmth through halls that had gone cold long ago. One evening, as the last orange light faded over the hills, Olita approached him on the porch. "We've been talking," she said, "about the future." Buck nodded slowly. "Suppose you'll want to head back once things are rebuilt." Olita smiled a little. "Maybe. But Clara thinks we should offer something in return for staying here. Della wants to help with the cattle, Maria wants to plant a proper garden, Irene wants to build a smokehouse, and I could teach weaving classes if there's space." Buck scratched his jaw. "You don't owe me a thing." "Maybe not," she said softly. "But people heal faster when they're building something." Buck looked out over his land, the barns, the fences, the pastures that had grown too quiet over the years. For the first time since his wife died, the place felt alive again. "All right," he said gruffly. "We'll build." Over the next month, the ranch transformed. The once neglected garden burst into color. A new smokehouse took shape near the shed. Horses, even the stubborn ones, responded to the widow's calm voices. And Buck. He laughed more, talked more, listened more. Some nights he'd sit on the porch with Clara, both of them quiet, both watching the moon lift over the desert like a silver promise. One night she said, "Losing someone doesn't mean life stops. Just means it changes shape." Buck swallowed hard. "Took me a long time to learn that." "You're learning now." Months later, people from town started visiting, some to buy Olita's weavings, some to trade for the smoked meats Irene prepared, others to admire Maria's thriving garden. Instead of being the lonely old cowboy on the outskirts of Clayton County, Buck Halden became the man whose ranch had grown into something of a refuge, a place where broken things knit themselves whole again. One evening, as the widows prepared dinner and the desert wind whispered its familiar song, Buck stood in his doorway watching them work. 5 women who came to him out of desperation yet brought with them new life, new purpose, new laughter. "You all right, Buck?" Clara asked from the stove. He nodded slowly. "Better than I've been in a long time." And the ranch, no longer silent, no longer hollow, held his words with warmth, like a home finally awake.